Record, and we're going to get things started. So we are super grateful and excited today to have Dale Halaway joining us for our weekly fireside chats. Um, we are going to get really deep, real quick on what's to come for 2024. And I always like to start things off with a little bit about the person on the other side. So Dale, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Max.
And second of all, would love to start with your own journey of personal transformation. Um, Maybe you can share a pivotal moment in your life that led you on this path of transformation and spiritual growth. Just really give us a sense of how you became the person you are today.
Well, the starting point, I'm originally from Canada. And prior to moving to the US about 35, 36 years ago or so, I guess at this point, it was 1987. Um, I was fairly successful in Canada and was involved in all kinds of activities. I, at the time, was president of 3 different companies. I was a writer of a couple of different magazines. I had my own television show. I was constantly on radio as a guest, and things were going quite well for me. And one day in 1986, I was sitting on the end of my bed and just kind of contemplating my life at this point and what all was going on and where I was to be going next. And next thing you know, I found myself on the floor. And literally, I was pushed from the side of my bed onto the floor, landed on my butt, and felt these hands come in from behind and just basically grab me, my physical form, and as I said, shoved me off the side of the bed and where I landed on the floor. Well, needless to say, that really got my attention because there was nobody in the house with me that day, at least in physical form. And that's what really started what ultimately would become, at this point, I suppose, maybe about a 37-year long journey, 36, 37-year long journey. And so that was the starting point when I knew, or shortly thereafter, I began to sense my time was up in Canada. It was time for me to come to another country. Um, I had no idea how I was going to get here at that point in time. So another year, year and a half had passed. During that year, or a year and a half, so, or 18-month period, all kinds of experiences would happen in my life that many back in those days would call like paranormal. Nobody had a reference point for them back then. But ultimately, I found myself moving to the US. Uniquely enough, everything opened up for me, opened up naturally, organically. And for those of you that have come in from another country, immigrated here, you know there's a whole process that we go through to become, what's known as a legal immigrant. And so, anyhow, that was all taken care of for me. And now I supported myself through it, but nonetheless, the doorway had opened. And next thing you know, I'm in the US. I'm now working in the US. I go from knowing many people in the country that I was born and raised in, where I could walk into pretty much any restaurant. Somebody would walk up to me and, "Hi, Dale," and ask me a question, ask if they could get my autograph and that type of thing, to a country where literally I knew 4 people and that was it. And so that was kind of a little bit of a shock for me. And I didn't realize at the time, but that's where my transformation was really about to begin. Because within 1 year of me landing here in the US at that time, I found myself in a doctor's office. I was experiencing all kinds of physical sensations in my body that I didn't understand. I did not understand at the time. And so I was recommended to this high energy doctor, high vibe doctor, who was more holistic at that point in time. And he was one of a kind there, because back during those years, there weren't many of these types of individuals. Anyhow, so I got an appointment, went in. He had me lay down on his bed there. And as he did, all of a sudden, my body went off into an activation that, quite frankly, he had never even seen before. I clearly hadn't seen before, at least in this life. And but he was so in tune with his own intuition or his own spirit or higher self like anybody I had ever come across before prior to this time. And so he just went with what he was getting from spirit or from his own higher self, because as he would tell me later, that from his background, he really didn't know what was going on. All he knew that what was happening at that point in time was beyond something he had ever experienced before. And it had some kind of a spiritual component in this thing. In other words, I was going to be safe. I didn't need to be taken to the hospital, that type of thing. But my body started doing things that was quite remarkable. And of course, he's a doctor. He has other patients coming in. So at some point, he had to leave me in the room in which I was in, and he would go and check on his other patients that were coming in, and he would just leave me there. And he made me be assured that he was just in the room next to me, and if by chance I needed him, just to do my best at screaming out. I never needed to do that. But this whole experience went on for 5 hours that day. I was laying on that bed. And 5 hours later, everything started to calm down. And that was really the pivotal moment, transformationally wise. So this would have been, I guess, 35, 34 years ago, somewhere around there. I didn't know it at the time, but that was the door opener. Because remember, back then, Max, and some of your community might also recognize this. Back in those days, the only way you'd find a transformational teacher, the only way you'd find a real serious healer that really knew what they were doing and had a truckload of experience backing them up, the only way that would happen, you'd have to go into the underground, into the mystery school, so to speak, as they were known back then and still are to this day, because it just wasn't good for business to make yourself known when you're operating at that level. It just wasn't a good idea. And so that's the way it was back then. So to find somebody to really help you when you are experiencing things that nobody around you has ever experienced before, including a professional or even a healer, was a rather unique thing, at least for me back then. But yet that's became the story of my journey, meaning a real constant for me, because over the next 10 to 15 years, I mean, there was not a week that went by that I didn't have another one of those types of experiences. And sometimes I'd find somebody to support me through that experience. Many times there was nobody other than my connection that I had with those masters that were working with me, supporting me, nurturing me, holding me in that space from the other side of the curtain. And that in itself became a whole nother experience to get really trusting of that. And then open, so those doorways or those inner channels would open where I'd be able to communicate effectively and efficiently and even masterfully at some point, maybe a decade or so later, with the other side. But that was my starting point. And then those first 10 to 15 years, that became all foundational for me. Somewhere in that process, I rather quickly moved into teaching on a more transformational level, became known as a transformational teacher. And then over a few more years, next thing you know, my students were referring to me as a master transformational teacher because they'd never experienced anybody like me prior to whatever time they were at on their timeline, in terms of not only having met me, but having me to work with them and support them along their journey.
Wow. Well, thank you for that great start. And there's so many directions we could take it. Uh,
Mhm.
Maybe just to jump right to, a point. When you say other sides and you say masters and channels and spirits, what are you referring to, and how do you describe it to someone who maybe hasn't connected to that realm? And how do you explain it to the layperson?
Yeah, so you might think of it this way, because now it's kind of common practice pretty much around the globe. So if you think of somebody who has had a near-death experience, which I've had more than one at this point in my life or along my life's journey. When somebody has a near-death experience, and which implies they come back, they die, they physically die, where they stop breathing for 60 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, maybe as many as 3 minutes, maybe even a little bit longer. Everybody's very unique. Um, but in that moment of their body completely shutting down, many of them, not all of them, but many of them go to this higher vibe place. Some refer to it as heaven, some refer to it as love, some refer to it as the energy of God, and on and on and on. And I'm sure you've heard some of these stories. Gosh, there's been so many that's been documented now. I'm talking thousands of documentations of near-death experiences. And so, and when you study them, which I did many years ago, I studied over 700 cases over a period of maybe about 8 or 9 years, um, only because I had my first near-death experience and I wanted to know more about it. Like, was I the only one, or were there others that were having some kind of a similar experience? Well, I found out there were others. This was many, many years back for me, but nonetheless, that was very encouraging. And in that, I realized that one of the common denominators when you have this experience, there's another side. There is another world. It does exist. It is real. And it's not this world. It distinctly is another world. This other world is, you could say, it's made up of pure love. It's made up of total abundance. It's made up of complete unity. There are no wars there. There are no conflicts. There is no fear. Um, it really is this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place that's, quite frankly, it's all inside of us. And, but in order to get there, you've got to travel through, for those of you that know about this, you've got to travel through your own inner central channel in order to get there. And, but it is available and it is accessible. So that's one. The other is on this, on sometimes what I refer to just the other side of the curtain or the other side of the veil. I'm sure you've heard maybe that expression before. The other side of the veil. There are, this is where your loved ones who have since crossed over can come to hang out with you for a moment in time. And sometimes that can be an experience where you could be in your nighttime dream space and it's 3 o'clock in the morning. And next thing you know, you are having some kind of a visceral experience with your deceased mother who passed 10 years ago, or even 1 year ago, or even 3 months ago. And for you, when you're having this experience and you come out of it on the other side, nobody can convince you otherwise that you just literally were face to face, belly to belly with your beautiful mother. And something significant, something spiritually significant was happening between you and your loving mother or father or brother or sister or child or whoever. And so that's another way of looking at this. Then when we look at the masters who are on the other side, they do not have physical form. So there are both masters on each side of the veil. So on the side that I'm highlighting, there are many masters. They no longer carry a physical form. They're fully planted in their energy double or their body energy double. And, but they are masters and they have the ability to connect with us. And especially if they're under contract with us, under soul contract or spiritual contract, to where they are to be serving us, assisting us along our journey. Then to that, you have, and I'm sure everybody's going to relate to this, you have your guides, you have your guardian angels. Everybody has at least one guardian angel, and everybody has at least one or two guides. Depending on your mission on the planet, depending on who you are at soul level, determines how many guides you have, how many guardian angels you have, and whether or not you have a loving master that's been contracted to support you while you're here going through your journey known as life. But more specifically, when you get stuck, snafu, you're not sure, or in my case, where when I was younger, there just weren't a lot of teachers around, not at this level, far from it. There maybe were people around that read a couple of good books and they could intellectualize this stuff, they could conceptualize this stuff. But I learned rather quickly back in the day, when you're around somebody like that and you are really going through all kinds of physical sensations that nobody understands, then that person they can't help you. In fact, what usually happens with that person, they become afraid. Their own inborn fears activate because they don't understand what's going on with you. And so therefore they just automatically activate on a lower level. And then because you're going through these deep, deep physical sensations, which can also open you up a little bit more psychically or empathically, and all of a sudden you start hearing their thoughts or you start sensing their energy. And because now they're scared because they don't understand what you're going through, they're scared. Now you got that to deal with as well. So I learned very early, nope, there are people that on an intellectual level, they might have access to all this knowledge, but on an experiential level, they have not yet mastered it. And because they have not yet mastered it, no matter what they do, they cannot fully understand what you're going through. So therefore, it might be more of a challenge for them to be able to support you. But to that, if it's a real master, a master either on the other side, that on the other side of the curtain, that is, that no longer has a physical form, or it could be a master now on this side, because now we have a few masters literally walking the face of this earth right now. They don't go up and broadcast themselves as a master, far from it. But you'll know when you're in their presence because they have abilities that the average person might also have, but just hasn't yet fully embodied those abilities yet. Or maybe the average person doesn't have those abilities because their soul is not old enough yet to even house those types of abilities. But nonetheless, you're now in the presence of somebody who you clearly get the message shortly after you meet up with them that they're not better than you, but they're further along on their journey than you, which means they might have an understanding of you that you have not yet accessed. And that's one of the beauties of whether it's a master in physical form or a master on the other side, that a true master can assist us in this way, in the best of ways.
Wow. Mind-blowing. Mind-blowing and body-blowing and spirit all at the same time. So would you say that, your ability to connect with this realm is predetermined by the age of your soul, or can anyone on planet Earth, no matter how old their soul is, be able to experience some of these physical sensations that are associated with being connected to the other side?
Well, this is where wisdom comes into play. So one of the masters that came to me back when I was in my 20s, and I had my television show at the time. And this was the great Atlantean god Thoth, or Thoth, however you choose to pronounce his name. And so this is going to be my first experience. I'm now in my mid 20s in the studio where we're televising my show at the time. And the show that came on right after me was a show with somebody who was channeling. Remember, this is a long time ago. They were channeling at this time a higher being that was actually in the Atlantean civilization and coming through with specific information. And somehow, some way, this show, and it could be because it was right next to mine or right after mine. So when we did the crossover in the studio, I would be in the energy field. And of course, this was all on purpose. I'd come to appreciate later. But what was now happening, literally from the first time I had this experience with their show on the Atlantean civilization, I went into a immediate recall phase where I started recalling these memories of when I was in the Atlantean civilization, and more specifically, my role in the Atlantean civilization. And then to that, my role to and with Thoth, the great Atlantean god as he was known back then. This is like 35,000 years ago in the Atlantean time. And so that was my very first visceral experience. That went on for 10 years in my life, where it was almost, if not daily, weekly, where there was some kind of a contact that was being made between Thoth and I. And then that eventually would lead to another place, which perhaps we can talk about at another time, if appropriate. But this was just mind-boggling for me back then, partly because I had nobody in my world. And yet I knew a lot of people, or a lot of people knew me, and yet nobody understood this. They were fascinated by whenever I opened up and I started sharing stories of what was happening. People would be fascinated. But to that, when we look at soul level or soul age, so this is where it really gets revealed. So, there's a number of different ages, as in us at soul level, not our personality or our ego, or even our physical form. And so, in that, to keep this really simple, at the opening, you would have the new soul or the infant soul, right? This is a soul that doesn't have a lot of experience yet as a soul. So, therefore, they don't have much wisdom. I'm going to circle back to this wisdom here in a moment. So, but then from there, then you go up a level. And in order to go from an infant soul to a new soul, we're looking at tens of thousands of years, quite frankly, in linear time. Then the next level to that, you eventually get to what's known as an immature soul. And then you get to a mature soul. And the scale just keeps on climbing. And eventually you get to what's known as an older soul. What's the difference between an older soul and a infant soul? It's experience. And what that translates into is wisdom. Well, Thoth, the great Atlantean god, that's what he was known for. Jesus was known for love, and Thoth was known for wisdom. And so, anybody that knows me really well, they'll, I'm sure, tell you that, I'm probably one of the most wisest people that they've ever come across. Well, I've been around the block for a long, long time now at this point, not just in this life, but in previous lives. So it doesn't take anybody that's open when they come into my field for them to start to recognize, oh my gosh, I'm in the presence of somebody who carries a tremendous amount of wisdom, not intellectual wisdom, but embodied wisdom. This was the marker of the great Atlantean Thoth, is he was the embodiment. He was the epitome of total and complete wisdom. Absolutely amazing. And that became something back in the Atlantean days that I really aspired to. And so in this, from an older soul category or on, this is where you start to experience notable levels of wisdom. And it's that wisdom that, quite frankly, Max, I often say this in my classes or my coaching programs now, or mentoring programs, is that we as a humanity in current time, here we are in January of 2024, we are literally drowning in information as a humanity. Our younger people are drowning in information because the information is so accessible thanks to the internet. And yet, while that's going on, we as a humanity are starving for wisdom, real wisdom, not intellectual. It's embodied wisdom. So, and when you're in the presence of an older soul, and I would say most, at least in your community, are probably at that level. They're at that level of older soul level, which means they already embody a certain amount of wisdom at soul level. And here's the master key, that they've earned. Wisdom cannot be given. It can only be earned. This has stood the test of time for tens and tens of thousands of years in our lineage as a humanity now. It's so obvious. Anybody that knows how to access for real, whether it's in current time or previous time, anybody knows how to access, you'll see this. It's written throughout all text, is that wisdom is something that you and I at soul level have been, we are, and we will continue to be influenced, driven towards earning more wisdom. Because this is where the soul, as in our soul, this is where it really benefits, because the soul is on its own journey to advance itself, to accelerate itself, and to expand itself. To do that, it needs to have more wisdom. It's the wisdom that's the marker. So when you're out in the world and you're connecting with people, there are some people that you'll come across who, everybody has a little bit of wisdom at the very least, including that infant soul. They have a little bit of wisdom. But if you're in the presence of an infant soul, And an older soul, I mean, it becomes really notable at that point. Whoa, the level of wisdom, the experienced wisdom, the embodied wisdom becomes really obvious from the older soul, especially when you have the contrast to that of a younger soul. Then, if you were to go just one step beyond the older soul, as the older soul, you go on into what's known as an advanced soul. And the advanced soul is wherever you're with an older soul and you've got the contrast between an older soul and advanced soul, again, it'll be extremely notable with the level of earned wisdom. Then you go beyond that because there's, a few more levels after the advanced soul. And with each level, the thing you'll notice is now at that place, you'll notice two things. You'll notice the wisdom is richer, it's deeper, it's more powerful and more beneficial should you be in the presence of that individual. Because once that individual opens up and starts sharing, you'll know when you're there versus you have this contrast of when you're with, say, a younger soul. Then to that, at some point from the older soul category to this advanced soul level, what happens there is that this love also becomes really notable. And the idea here is that us at soul level, while we're in physical form, we are to become the embodiment of pure, unconditional love and incredible, earned, well-experienced wisdom in physical form. That is something that everyone's soul already knows. But depending on how connected you are to your soul versus maybe how disconnected you might be to your soul, then determines how much of that you really know in that of your physical form. Your physical form, it's made up of those 50 trillion plus cells, because all those cells have their own intelligence as well. And so the key here is over time, not just in the course of a lifetime, but over time as the soul is journeying through its lifetime experiences, the soul is constantly to be gathering, learning, earning, expanding, lifting, elevating, and so on and so forth. That's how you make your soul really, really happy. And then at some point, ultimately, you become the embodiment of that soul. In other words, you become that wisdom the soul already carries, or you become that wisdom that the soul's in process of prompting you to earn more of, or you become that soul that's now on its way to becoming that unconditional love. So that not only does that love go inward towards self, but that love then goes outward to anyone that we are to be really loving towards, or at least hold that space. And this is what happened for me when I was a young man, when the masters, one by one, and I've had many of them from the other side, when they would come, I would feel something. That day, when I got pushed off the side of I had a waterbed back then, a big king-size waterbed, because that was the popular thing to have back in those days. And when I got booted off that bed, even though, when I landed on the floor, it hurt. There's no doubt about it. But you know what? I knew the moment it happened that I didn't know who pushed me off at that point, but I knew it was done in the most loving of ways as a way to grab my attention, which is exactly what it did during that time of my journey.
Incredible, incredible insight, and hopefully we're all earning a little wisdom on this call. Now, in this kind of soul framework, you can't choose how old your soul is. You kind of inherit this in your existence. In that sense, it feels like the wiser you are, the more likely you are to have joy and love and abundance and happiness and connection and all of the things that we desire as our highest self. So would you say that life on earth is kind of rigged a little bit? Those who have that embodied older, more advanced soul just have countless advantages over those who are on earth with an infant or immature soul. Is that fair to say, or can those with infant or immature souls also have the same levels of abundance and happiness and joy of someone who has an older or more advanced soul?
It's a great question, Max. I wrote a book. It was my second book, titled Transform Your Destiny. And it's a deep dive, deep dive, 500 pages. I mean, it's really, it deals with this. And what it deals with is that this wisdom, that it's one thing to have the wisdom, it becomes another thing of what are you going to do with the wisdom? And, you know, it's kind of like power. If your power level starts to increase, that then the next thing that happens is you're going to get to see how you utilize your power. So, and what we've seen in the past is some people misuse their power. If we go back into past timelines, many people have misused their power. And then every now and again, you see somebody who uses their power correctly or wisely. So, as we are earning more wisdom, we earn more wisdom to then see what we're going to do with that wisdom, because that becomes the extender to earning even more wisdom, or in this case, embodying the wisdom. So if I earn the wisdom and now I'm going to have some kind of an experience for me to be able to see how will I utilize that wisdom. So I'm sure you've seen this before. You're around somebody who's fairly wise, and yet sometimes they'll make some of the most interesting choices, either with their money flow, with their health, with their relationships, with the way they parent their kids. I've been out in the ditch now for 46 years. And when I say the ditch, I mean, that's working with people with my sleeves rolled up through my seminars and classes and coaching programs and mentoring programs. I am not a newbie here at all. And so I've worked with literally thousands and thousands of people throughout these decades. I've seen much of how people show up when they do get a little more extra wisdom. Then they get tested. We all do, every single one of us, around, okay, how are you now going to utilize this wisdom? Are you going to utilize it in a way that's really going to be super beneficial for you and others? Or are you possibly going to use it in a way where you're going to power over somebody? You're going to take advantage of somebody. You're going to use that wisdom to maybe become a better manipulator of somebody. That's all available too. And so when I say transform your destiny, which is the title of that second book, what I'm implying there is that even though we are born with a destiny, but here's the deal, is that in order to transform your destiny, and pretty much everybody on the planet is required to transform their destiny, implying at the very least there's two levels of destiny. And within these two levels of destiny, there's this incredible divine birthright that we've all been given, which is free will. Free will. So, you can become pretty advanced, at least in your own right, and now you're exercising your free will, but you might make a poor choice in any of those areas that I mentioned, before. And I see it happen all the time as somebody who mentors a lot of people. I mentor some very successful people, high level people, CEOs of large companies or executive VPs of, they have a great responsibility of many people that they are to be serving and assisting. And I can assure you, you'd be amazed at how many people can make a poor choice. And even though they're wise, or they've already embodied a certain amount of wisdom, even in just this life alone, and yet still they'll make a poor choice. It's all part of the journey. That's the whole point. And so when I make that poor choice, or should I make a poor choice, then it becomes, all right, so on the heels of the poor choice, now there's going to be some kind of a consequential effect for that choice. This is the way the universe has been set up. I didn't make this up. But, when I was younger and I was teaching back in the 70s and 80s, that's what I became known for, is teaching universal law. And I became, over time, not right away, but over time, quite masterful at it. And, this is all governed by law. There's many different laws, and one of them plays right into this free will and how when we choose to exercise our free will, if it turns out to be a great choice, then usually that is followed by a blessing or a positive consequence. If, on the other hand, we make a poor choice, or a bad choice or a weaker choice, whatever word you want to give that, then there's also a consequential effect for that choice. Obviously, it's not going to be as positive. Now, the idea is we want to turn it into a positive by really accepting the consequence of whatever that choice was that we made, because that's going to be part of our learning. And in that learning of the consequence, that's where we have a golden opportunity to take the learning and to translate that, transform that into more wisdom that the soul now gets to embody, which means we now get to embody. And then out of that, we get better and better, slowly but surely, at making better choices, wiser choices, higher choices. That's what ultimately determines our day-to-day destiny. It's just so incredibly powerful once you are cracked open to this and you are now accessing, say, these universal laws and how this has really been set up for us at and from soul level, to have that awareness in your own physical form and know that this is part of everyone's journey until you eventually get to that point where you master yourself. You achieve a level of self-mastery. And one of the ways in how you'll know that you're there, because you'll see in full living color that the choices you're now making, for the most part, you want to talk about wise choices. This is where now wisdom that's been earned and embodied is now coming through that sacred process of exercising free will. Exercising free will now from and on a higher level, but while you're in physical form. So you're doing this all through your brain, through your heart space in your physical body. You're no longer going somewhere to access this, for what you're now accessing is totally embodied inside of you, within all those 50 trillion cells that make up your physical form.
Incredible. So we're going to move into audience Q&A in just a minute, but in the spirits of today and looking into the future for 2024, oftentimes we make these resolutions and it's New Year's, we want to do this, we want to set this goal, and then we falter and end up kind of repeating some of the patterns the previous year. So in this context of self-mastery, what's sort of your guidance and advice so that all of us can actually honor the commitments we make and achieve the goals that we set?
Well, I have a lot of experience with this because of both with companies and now with the general public. So with companies, I'll do a program for them towards the end of each year, if I'm on board with that company, that is. It's usually 4 or 5 days in length. It's 10 hours a day. It's very deep. And it's all about increasing the odds of truly having a better, more prosperous, more abundant year that's now coming for the company as a whole. And so there's a real art, there's a real mastery to doing this from a company's point of view, because there's a lot of people involved. So I'll go into the organization. This will be at least a 4-day event, like I said, and there will be anywhere from 15 to 30 to 45 to as many as even 60 people that will be a part of this event. And then when we come out on the other side, something really significant will have occurred with this company. And where you see the significance is what happens when they come into January 2nd of that new year that's coming. When they come out and they hit the pavement, so to speak, as a company, they talk about notable. It's really obvious that they now have an edge over all companies that would be in their genre, because they start achieving and accomplishing things that most companies around them on their best of days would never be able to do. Individually, this also holds true. On an individual level, most people don't even step into this sort of thing that I'm alluding to. And you'll see this because most people individually, they think that as we're coming to the next year, So we're now January 3rd of 2024 as of this broadcast here today with you and I, Max. But uniquely enough, as we're approaching November of 2023, you would hear people, oh, I just know next year, 2024 is going to be the big year, the best year, the most abundant year, and on and on and on. Well, again, I've been around the block quite a few times at this stage of my life in this lifetime. And I got to tell you, I've been hearing that for years. There's nothing new in my world when I hear those phrases come out of, because everybody does it. Everybody does it. They say, this last year kind of sucked for me. It was really challenging. I hope I don't have to repeat this again. I mean, I could write a book just on what happens as we're approaching to our New Year's Eve, with the idea being that because it's New Year's Eve, it suggests a new year, which really suggests that I'm to be experiencing a new way of living my life. But yet, if you really put this to a study, which I have done, and as others have done, you will see that the majority of people, it's a fantasy. All that's happening because there's a new year and because we're so conditioned as a people, from little kids all the way through to our current time, we're so conditioned this thing that somehow on New Year's Eve, when I get to New Year's Eve and I grab a bottle of champagne or a glass of champagne or a bottle of wine or a glass of wine, that all that's really required, I just come up with a resolution. Like, I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to quit smoking. I'm going to quit using drugs. Whatever. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Again, I could write a quite compelling book on this with just what's come out of many people's mouths throughout the years or even decades of teaching now. And so then they get to New Year's Eve, they do their little salute, and then they wake up on New Year's Day feeling kind of rough, maybe because of the alcohol or the drugs from the night before. But then they give themselves a day or so to kind of shake themselves off. Now it's January 2nd. Oh my gosh, we're going to have a great year. Well, here's the study. By the time we get to the end of February, the majority of people that live this way, nothing will have changed for the better. In fact, that of what they resolved to say they were going to do or no longer do, on or by the third week of February into the new year, all of that will be completely forgotten about. This is a fact. I'm not making this up. This is a fact. And so what I decided long ago, I wanted to serve people in this way. So as I already mentioned, a little story there about the companies and organizations that I've worked with or work with in that way and serve. So at some point, I wanted to serve the general public, and I wanted to be able to, because the general public won't go ahead and dedicate 4 or 5 days. They just won't do it. They will not do it. And I shouldn't say all of them, but a very small percentage would maybe do it. But the majority will not do it. They just won't do it. So what I did is I created a one-day program. A one-day program, thought, okay, well, that makes it easier for them to wrap their brain around. And then even that, there are some people that still won't commit to even a one day to learn how to do this correctly. And why is this so important? Because here's what happens with the majority of people. The majority of people on the planet, they do nothing more than do what I've referred to for decades now, is they repeat. They basically, as they're coming into a new year, and with the exception of that excitement and a little bit of that fantasy that goes on as they're turning into the new year, eventually within 6 weeks, all of a sudden the fantasy, the excitement, it kind of goes away, and you'll see it if you start conducting the studies like I've done. They'll literally default back to what was going on for the last couple of years, and then they'll just repeat it. And then it just goes on and on and on. Well, what I found is there's a way to break the cycle. What I discovered, I unpacked this long ago. There's a specific way to do this, because you've got to understand that that's a pattern. You see, going back to my second book, Transform Your Destiny, I do a lot on, you'll learn a lot about karma. I approach karma from 8 different ways. One of the pieces on karma there, I talk about patterning, and especially the lower energy patterning that most people are completely governed by. They just don't know it until they become aware of what this is, and then are given the tool or tools on how to clear it. Because if we don't know what it is, or maybe we do know what it is, but we don't know how to clear it, well, then it just keeps on running our life like a program in your computer. It's all that happens. So, so for me, many years ago, I decided, you know what? I want to help as many people as I can to break this vicious cycle of repeat and literally turn it into a renewing, which is really what New Year's is to be. New Year's Eve was not just to be a resolution, it was to be a renewing. But in order to get to a renewing, you've got to first and foremost get to the clearing. So again, when I say I unpack this, I unpacked it and I unpacked it in like 3 different ways. So whenever we do this 1-day program come the end of the year for the general public, which is called Illuminate, or in this case, it was Illuminate 2024, it's done very specifically. So the first part of it is we've got to do a full-on review of the last year we just experienced. We got to get real here now, right? And when those of us that are willing to get real, just this piece alone is so revealing of what you end up learning and discovering about you. It's absolutely amazing. I can't imagine if people knew this was available, why they'd ever want to say no to it, ever. It's so incredibly elevating and inspiring and empowering. Then the second piece is where we look at, because of some of the abilities that have, the higher abilities that is, that have opened up for me as a result of all of my transformational work that I've done throughout the decades at this juncture. So I'm able to read past timeline, present timeline, future timeline, not just individually with individuals that I work with or my students that are part of our network, but also collectively. So, and this is obviously a unique ability. I'm not the only one on the planet who can do this, but I'm clearly one of those who can do this. I do it all the time. And so what happens is when I'm doing a year-end event, whether it's for a company or for the general public, I always include this. And here's why. Because once I open up and I go with, whatever the markers are going to be, the significant markers, and in a moment here, I'll give you one of them, but whatever the markers are going to be for the new year. So in this case, it was 2024. These markers are of immense value to everybody because it's something we all share. We all are sharing this because we're on this soul's journey, not just individually, but also collectively. Once you know what these markers are, what that does, it helps you to better navigate through whatever you're going to experience in the coming year, to more effectively and efficiently navigate whatever's going to happen. Because the last part of this year-end program that I do is equally key to the first 2 parts, and that is it's only at this point that we now dive into creating our plan, our personal plan, our personal spiritualized or even business plan or entrepreneurial plan for 2024. So by the time we get to that part, we are ready, baby. We are ready to rock and roll because we're now accessing things that have been going on within us, things that we've experienced from this last year that we really are to be closing out. We really are to be bringing to an end. We really are to be completing and completing well. Simultaneously, we now know what the markers are that are coming for the next year. So we can now use all this to plan accordingly, along with, okay, what's my deepest heartfelt desire that I feel very connected to, that I would like to experience and achieve or accomplish in the new year. And out of that, that's where we create our personal plan. So, and then once that's done, you'll see it, put me in front of 100 people that are courageous enough and willing enough to spend a full day with me doing this. And by the time we're done, you will see 100 people. They will feel so incredibly empowered. They will feel so hopeful. They will feel so encouraged. They're genuinely excited about the new year because now they've been basically armed with what it is they were to be doing all along, as each year was to be closed out and the next year was to be embraced. They just didn't know it because you're not going to learn this in university and you're not going to learn this in college. You're not going to learn this in high school, at least to this point in time. You've got to seek this out from somebody who's gone before you, who really does know this and possibly even is a master at it, both in terms of how they live their own life, but then also they're very effective at teaching this. So anyhow, I know you asked about a marker. What do I see for 2024? So in 2024, I'll share just a couple of things. One is there's going to be a splitting of the earth. The earth is about to split. And the truth is, we've already been in the appetizer phase, so to speak. I've been experiencing this now for the last maybe 3 years, physically experiencing this. So there's nothing new to this, at least with me at all. Those students of mine, they already kind of had a little bit of a heads up that this was coming because I've often spoken about this. But we're now here. We're now here, the beginning part of 2024. This is where it comes into full gear. The splitting on the earth has to do with a number of different things. And one of them is, and Max, I know you would know this, and many of your community here would know this. So in the world of consciousness, there's a lower vibrational frequency or frequencies, and then there's a higher vibrational frequencies. And so where most people live their life from is in that lower world. And if they become really intellectual, then they might go for the trap by that of their ego and start to believe that that's all there is to life, is this lower vibrational frequency world that's available to each and every one of us. And therefore, they start to forget what's also available, which is a higher vibrational frequency world in consciousness. And so now that's been going on for a long time. There's nothing new about that. The new part is this, is that up until most recently, those two worlds were, anybody could access them. The lower world, that took no discipline. It took no teachings. It took no real effort. Anybody and everybody could access the lower vibrational frequency world. As I said, most of them, that's where they live. To access, however, a higher vibrational world and actually become the embodiment of that, that's a whole nother dynamic. That's usually where you have a teacher, a coach, a mentor, somebody who's gone before you. They're not better than you, but they've achieved something that you have not yet achieved. In other words, they really know what they're talking about. And so they can help to illuminate your pathway. They're not going to do your work for you, but they can help to illuminate your pathway clearly. And so, that's available. That's been accessible. As always, up until most recently. Now what's happened, those two worlds are about to split. And what that means is, as they split, the access is going to change. So, as I said to my group here just only a few days ago, here's what it's ultimately going to shake down. We're going to start to see the effect of this as early as this year, 2024. What's going to happen by the time we get into 2025 and 2026, it's going to get really loud, like really loud. This is, for most, it's going to become painfully obvious that something has seriously shifted. And the reason why this is happening, because it's now choice time. Remember, we were talking about free will. Remember, we were talking a little bit about transform your destiny. So to transform your destiny, that would mean you would literally recognize that in the body of destiny, there's a lower rung of destiny. And then to that, there's a higher rung of destiny. The higher rung, up until most recently, was only the masters who achieved it in physical form. That was it. The majority of people, conduct your own study, go back into time, read the records, you'll see it. The majority of people on their best of days, they got trapped in that pathway of their lower destiny. In other words, they never really transformed or transmuted enough to where they even started to access the higher path, the higher journey, even though it was accessible or available all along, but they couldn't get there. Well, in today's time, in light of what I just shared about this splitting on the earth, or the earth doing her split, what this implies is that these two worlds are going to literally, there's going to be a gap. And it's going to force choice. That's the purpose of this, divinely speaking. It's going to force choice. Instead of this choice, I'm going to sit on the fence. I'm going to sit on the fence. I'm going to sit on the fence from lifetime to lifetime. Should I or shouldn't I? Oh, that's kind of scary. I don't know if I want to deal with my own inner demons. I don't know if I want to really confront my own inner fears that have been buried inside of me for who knows how long. If that's what it means in order for me to transform your destiny, well, what's going to happen is going to force, and it's already started to very slightly or subtly right now, it's going to force choice for us as individuals. All right. So it's going to be, because we're going to get the contrast. We're going to get the contrast between a higher vibrational world versus a lower vibrational world. So you might also say the earth inner splitting. So I'm sure you've heard the terminology, the new earth. Well, what does that imply? Well, if there's a new earth that's coming, that means we have an old earth, right? So at some point, when this split becomes full on, everybody will have chosen, and they will have chosen, where do they want to land? Do they really want to rise up to a higher vibrational frequency? What this would look like very practically is that not only has my life transformed, have I transformed from the inside out, but I'm literally experiencing at a cellular level a whole new way of being as a man, as a woman, as a teenager, as an entrepreneur, as a career professional, as a mother, as a father, as a husband, as a wife. I'm experiencing a whole new way of being, a new way of being that I've never experienced before in this lifetime, ever. This is so vibrant, it's so radiant, it's totally divine, it's very real, because for most that are moving in this direction, they don't even know ultimately what it's going to be like. But their soul does. Their soul at the highest levels, because it's what the soul signed up for, is no, I want to be a part of this experience. I want to be able to not just transform all the way, but I also want to be able to become the embodiment of this whole new way of being a human being, or what I refer to as a divine human being on the planet. So that becomes my way of significantly contributing to the collective consciousness on the planet and helping it to advance forward, onward and upward. So that's one implication of this split. I'll stop there because you probably have a question or a comment that you might want to make. There's
Sure.
3 other different practical applications to this splitting, but that'll at least get us started.
Yeah. So first, we did reach our planned time limit of 1 hour. So for those of you who need to hop to another meeting or another call, feel free. Dale mentioned he does have some extra time as well. Do I? So we're just going to continue this call for a little while longer. And those of you who would like to continue to take in, this wisdom, feel free to stay on the line. I did want to acknowledge a few audience questions that I think are still very much connected to the splitting of the earth and the ascension of certain souls. So maybe we'll just tackle a few of those questions, and then we can revert back to the implications. Val asked, "How do you really know your soul's age? And how do you know when people, are thinking that they have a more advanced soul, and potentially manipulating others with that power?" So yeah, more insight into how you identify the age of your soul, and then how to identify other people's age and those who might be using it incorrectly.
Very good question. Yes. So the first thing is, for those that are an older soul or beyond, one of the indicators of that on a physical level will be when we were younger, as little boys or little girls, more than likely you had an aunt or an uncle or next door neighbor or a dear friend of the family or a mom or dad or a grandparent that would acknowledge you as such. That at the age of 7, you were being referred to, I don't know what it is about Max, he's just an older soul. And then it would be commented again and again, not just by your uncle, but then eventually your aunt or someone else. And so it just shows itself as an indicator. So in the first few years of life, if you're an older soul and beyond, just like you see today, for those of us that are, say, newer parents, and we have a child who's now, say, 7, 8, 9 years of age, we could very well be saying the same thing about our 7 or 8 year old child in current time. I can tell you right now, Johnny is an older soul, or Alice is clearly an older soul. Because as a parent, you're very intuitive, not just as the mother, but possibly as the father as well. You're both very intuitive, and you've got this special connection between the parent and the child, this deeper connection, this more sacred connection. So usually the parents will pick it up first around their child, and they'll start referring to their child as an older soul, or maybe even an advanced soul. They'll say, I don't know what it is. I can just tell you he's 11 years old. And I really just have this strong sense that my boy or my girl is an advanced soul. Now, when we are kids, we might not see it as such, just because of the process that we go through from the time that we travel through our mother's womb into this world. And then for the first number of years of our life, there are other things that we go through. It's just all part of the process. So we may not recognize it the same way as mom or dad or aunt or uncle or a grandparent does. But then later on in life, at some point, it starts to really connect with us. And part of how it connects with us is we see that all of a sudden our friends, we now have 5 or 6 friends. And we begin to notice, maybe we're 15 years of age, we begin to notice that at least some of our friends, when they're having a troubling time, guess who they come to? They come to the wisest person in the circle. Think about that for a moment. They just naturally gravitate towards the wiser person. And the wiser person, you might not even be aware of this in light of yourself, but if you reflect back on conscious memory from this lifetime, you'll see that there was a time period, maybe in your teens, maybe you got into your 20s, you're now pursuing a career, you're in a business, and you've got 10 colleagues in your business, and next thing you know, 2 or 3 of them just naturally kind of gravitate towards you when it comes to presenting questions to you or asking for a little support from you, that type of thing, because they sense, like your mom and dad did from way back when, that you are maybe not a better soul, but you're just a wiser soul. That as I often say, you either have that level of wisdom or you don't. And if you have it, then by law, by universal law, it must be acknowledged. It must be brought to our attention somehow, some way, through someone or someones, as in plural, in that of our external world. So I gave you a couple examples of how that might be. Then, as you get a little older and you start to find yourself drawn to a more spiritual path, sometimes it's really interesting. Some people have this definition of what spirituality really is. And then as they grow and evolve more, they realize that definition was a lower definition. There's a much higher, more expanded, more practical definition of spirituality. So sometimes that becomes somebody's experience. And in that, you might find yourself, at the age of 35, and you're not so much attracted to what everybody calls spirituality. You're more attracted to what's known as practicality. And now you're in a business and people are looking to you. They admire you because you're so incredibly practical, but practical in a wiser way, practical in a meaningful way. And all of a sudden they want more because they get this value from you, because it's somehow, some way that helps that particular group of people because they're to become more practical in their world too. Maybe this company is attracted in somebody who sees himself as very spiritual, but they're not all that practical. They're very spiritual, but they live in the ethers. They're not all that grounded. And then they come into this company, and at some point they start to make the connection. And next thing you know, they find themselves attracted to this practical oriented person. That could be you in the company, this practical oriented person, but it's deep. It's just well grounded. And boy, oh boy, when you start offering some insight, when you start offering some practicality, your practicality is strategic, it's sequential, it's easy to track, It's easy to know exactly what to do next. Well, to most people, that in itself could become of great value. Well, what is that? Here we're in the presence of somebody who's really practical, and we're also in the presence of someone who clearly is an older soul, because the younger souls, they don't know how to do that yet. No
Yeah.
way.
Now,
So that's another way to spot it.
I don't know if you've read our websites, but one of our primary characteristics of the community is spiritual yet grounded. You know, we've been saying this for now
I
years,
love it.
and it's very much the giraffe that represents this energy because head in the clouds, feet on the ground. So it feels divine that that you use that language. And you know, just to kind of continue on to this point of soul development, Sarah asked, you know, what can you do within this lifetime to earn or grow that wisdom? And I would assume that it's, you know, finding alignment with the universal laws and actually, you know, acting in coherence that allows you to earn and grow that wisdom. But maybe there's a more nuanced answer, and would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, yes. So everything you just said, that all will contribute greatly. But to that, if we were to break this down to the ridiculous, to the practical side of what is also can be known and viewed as something deeply and profoundly spiritual, and that is we're exploring our choices, and more specifically, the quality of the choices that we're making, and wherever we are to be course correcting, wherever we are to be learning from the choices that we just made. Because every time we learn from a choice, and especially when we learn well from that choice, what that does, it just naturally, organically begins to translate into more wisdom that we now embody, which is all being prompted by that of our own soul. Because our soul is always, always driving to the earning, to the embodiment of more wisdom, to also the embodiment of more love. Again, that love and wisdom. So as we explore our choices, and then as we explore this idea, are we learning well from the choices that we're making? Not just the poor choices, but even the better choices. Are we learning well? I remember when I was a young man, I was making some phenomenal choices, like really, really excellent choices. And obviously, because you could tell, you know, one of my baseline teachings on a real practical level is that the results never lie. The results that show up in my body, the results that show up in my life, they never lie. And that I've been teaching since I've been in my 20s. And I can prove it to people. I prove it to people all the time. By if they're willing, I'll take them through a process and I'll prove it to them that whatever the results are, they're showing up in their world, can trace the entire thing completely back to them, and more specifically, what's going on inside of them. And once that connection is made, it's like one of the most incredible things you'll ever do for yourself, because this now becomes real authentic empowerment. Something shifts for the better in the healthiest of ways from the inside out with that individual. And so, but back in my 20s, you know, I was obviously making great choices. That my results would constantly talk about it or manifest. And next thing you know, I found myself, again, as I mentioned at the opening, not just with my own television show, but I found myself appearing as guests on other people's radio shows, mainly back in those days. And eventually the big question would come and I would start to stress. And they would ask me, like, Dale, as we study about you or we look into your past, you know, here you are only 26 years of age. And what you're achieving at the age of 26, most people don't achieve even when they turn 56. Like, how are you doing this? Like, where did you come from? And I literally, they wouldn't see this because it was all done on the radio and we didn't have the internet back then. I would freeze. I would freeze because the only answer that I had for them is I worked my tail off, which was true. I've got a great work ethic. I had great work ethic back in those days, but that was not it. Of course, it supported it because of my work ethic, but that was not it at all. It was, I was making these really awesome choices. But believe it or not, back then, I could not even connect to that. I could not connect to the quality, the higher quality of choices I was making. I know this probably doesn't make any sense. That was in my 20s. How could that possibly be? But that's what I was doing. I was not aware of that's what I was doing. But as long as I kept on doing it, then it would produce a consequential effect. In that case, it was positive, 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 success, 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 until eventually I couldn't stand this thing anymore about being asked yet one more time, what's your secret? How do you do this? Please don't tell me you just work hard. Everybody works hard. And I couldn't tell them. And so then what do? Then you make a choice on an unconscious level, at least I sure did. Subconsciously, I made a choice to turn on the switch to sabotage my success. And in the next 10 to 12 months of my life from that time when I made that choice, now I wasn't aware of that. Again, this was unconscious. It was subconscious. It wouldn't be until years later, as I started doing deeper transformational work, that I reflected back and I realized, oh my gosh, this is what was going on. Here I had this series of making really awesome choices. I just was unconscious to the real awesome choices that were producing this amazing effect in my world. And then, because I couldn't handle it back then, I didn't know what was going on. So what do? What anybody would do. And I've helped many people over the years to ultimately see this inside themselves. The switch went on subconsciously. I remained unconscious towards it. I began to sabotage my success. It took maybe at the most 12 or max 12 months. That was it. And I literally leveled the playing field, And then it would be a number of years after when I'd start to make this connection. It was my choice. It was my choice that I wasn't aware of, not just on the higher level that produced a more positive effect, but it was also equal to that then the other choices that I started making on a lower level that brought upon the result of sabotage. And now, a couple of years after that, I'm like, what the heck just happened? How could I have gone through that? And now I'm here and feeling somewhat depressed. And what did I do? And how did I screw this up? I really didn't know that as well, because again, I was more that, the four learning or the four cycles in true learning. And one of them is I was the unconscious competent.
Yeah.
Clearly. And I had that down full in spades. I just didn't know that about myself back then. But nonetheless, it produced both the positive result and the not so positive result thereafter. So choice. Really studying, examining, as Plato and Socrates would often say, really get into a full-on examination of the type of choices that you're making. And when something shows up in your world of, let's say, more negative nature in your world, like, how the heck did this happen? How the heck did this happen? Then that's when you want to be examining. And if you haven't taken the time to learn how to do this, then find a good teacher, find a good mentor that can teach you specifically, practically, and progressively how to do this for yourself. It'll be one of the best gifts you'll ever give yourself, because what that'll do, it'll help you over time to get better and better at choosing what it is that is most right for you to be experiencing in your day-to-day world, personally and or professionally.
Amazing. One question that comes up from that, choice overview is when accidents happen and how you can have sort of amazing choices throughout your life and the results are outstanding. At least they seem to be that way, but then something tragic happens out of the blue, seemingly. So I guess I just love to hear your perspective on accidents and tragedy, and if that also you think is a direct result of choice, or if things can just happen that are tragic to those who have been making amazing choices.
Well, from my understanding and experience at this point, I've come to appreciate that there are no such things as accidents in our own personal universes. And I don't only say that for myself, but I say that for the many that I've coached and mentored throughout the years or taught. I see it play out over and over and over and over again for people. And so to that, if a so-called accident happens, I was in a car accident many years back. and it left well, I had a near-death experience that night in the ambulance. They lost my vitals for 90 seconds, pushing up towards 2 minutes. Um, Obviously, I came back, and when I came back to a broken up body. And the broken up body, they wanted to do all kinds of surgeries at the time, and I gracefully declined all of that, um, and felt very strong because of a previous experience a number of years prior to this, that I could potentially clear this up naturally and organically. In other words, heal myself naturally. And so ultimately, that's what I did. It took me a while in linear time, but I ultimately got my body back and healed. Well, okay, so there's an accident. There's an actual car accident. 3 cars on the highway that night collided into each other, and some serious damage was caused. So, did that just happen by accident, or was it possible that I had something to do with it? Well, turns out it was very possible that I had something to do with it, as did the other 2 drivers in the accident that night, and quite frankly, even a couple of the passengers. And so, and a couple of them I ended up supporting a little while, or for a short little while after that, and they felt that was very helpful for them. But more importantly, or more specifically, I had to get inside of myself and really trace this. Like, where was it that I made a choice to go off the rails? So now, did I choose to have a car accident? No, I didn't choose to have the car accident. But what I did do, maybe the better part of a year prior to this, I chose to go off the rails. In other words, I chose to go off my path. Now, again, like that, when I was a young man, when I shared with you about, all the success and all those great choices I was making, I just was unaware of the choices that I was making. Equal to that, I became unaware when I made the choice to sabotage all this, because I could not handle another day of this kind of success because I didn't understand it. Well, then fast forward a number of years later, I'm in this car accident, something very similar, right? So where did I make this choice that clearly I was unconscious? And I was unconscious. I went unconscious because there was something going on in my world leading up to the accident a good year or 2 back, where, I wasn't willing to stand up to it. And again, go back to choice. I wasn't choosing to stand up to it. Rather, what I was choosing to do is cower down towards it, which, by the way, I've found a lot of people do this. I'm not just the only one. But I was unconscious, because when you start showing up this way and you start making these choices, the likelihood of you being conscious is next to nil. Because for you to be conscious and still make that choice, the pain you're going to feel in your body is immense. And so one of the reasons why I'm even choosing this is because there's already pain that I've already gone unconscious towards. In other words, I don't want to confront, I don't want to deal with. So ultimately, what clearly helped me to heal my body, especially in the last year or so, because it took me a good 2 years to even get to a success point of healing my broken body at the time. And then it took me another 3 years after that to really get to a place where my body was pretty much ready to go again. So when I went back, I had a lot of time to reflect on this, meditate on it, do a lot of transformational work on this, inward work, and I eventually got to it. I got to the exact moment where I made the choice to go off my path, off my journey, because I wasn't willing to stand up at that point in time to the earlier choice that I had made, where, because I was afraid of this, I was afraid of that, and so on and so forth. I had my own reasons, but nonetheless, I chose then, instead of standing up and really confronting that and working that through, I chose to cower down and continue on thinking that somehow I would still be able to make this situation work. Well, not only did I not make the situation work, I ended up causing pain for others during that exercise, and then all the way through to leading to what now became the car accident. The car accident at this point becomes now the attention getter. This is now what grabs my attention, to let me know that I clearly went off the rails, went off my pathway a while back. And again, at this point, I'm still unconscious around this. And so But as I just shared with you, eventually I became conscious by tracing it back, tracking it back, and realizing the choices that I was making back then that not only caused a lot of hurt to me, it caused hurt to others, which, and again, for those of you that are maybe inspired to check out my second book, Transform Your Destiny on Karma, because I approach karma from 8 different angles, 8 different practical places of what karma is, why it's set up, what's the real purpose behind karma, not what most people think it is. As in, most people think it's a punishment. It's not a punishment. It really is a blessing. But you got to have access to these teachings that are governed by universal law to where this is broken down in the most practical, most strategic, and sequential of ways, where the average brain can wrap itself around it and say, I understand this now, maybe for the first time in my entire lifetime. This is amazing stuff. Exactly. It's amazing because we really are to be blessed by this. In this case, the blessing started with grabbing my attention because I had gone unconscious. So now I needed the accident. The accident grabbed my attention. It's a very painful way to get it. I grant you that. Very loud way to get it, but it worked. It got my attention. And then to that, my body was broken. I needed to fix my body. I needed to repair my body. I needed to heal my body. And so, you know a little bit about that. I already shared or alluded to that a tad a moment ago. And so, you know, as I'm accomplishing that, I'm also inward transformationally, spiritually wise. Okay, where did I make this choice that ultimately led to this place that I'm now experiencing in my own world in terms of what's manifested in my own personal universe? And once I did that and then cleared up the karma that I created as a result of this, that's when I became even more blessed. One other thing I teach about in Transform Your Destiny, when we've got karma that we've either created from a previous time or from this time, and we actually resolve it for real, it's got to be fully resolved. But one of the things I highlight is there's some kind of a reward. So there's also a karmic reward. There's something else that happens that you might say is quite magical, it's quite beautiful, it's totally divine, that happens, but only when the karma has been fully resolved. And that's another way of letting you know that the karma has really been resolved. There's some kind of a beautiful shift towards the better. So again, we go back to the splitting of our world, not so much the earth. I know I said originally the earth, but it's really the world as we know it. So, and it's the world of consciousness. So as this world of our consciousness splits, making it more and more likely to get more people to choose, get off the fence and just make the choice. So something similar to what I just shared, right? You get to this point where you choose, and you choose differently. You choose wisely as a result of what you've learned from this amazing experience that you've had, pain and all, right? So on the heels of that comes this reward where, as I'll say to my students sometimes, when this happens, one of the ways in how you recognize it, you will literally feel a shift in your own physical consciousness at a cellular level. In fact, some of my students report back, because I've had the same experience, where you'll hear the sound of like a clock and it'll tick, it'll click. And what it's doing, it's literally clicking into the next level. So if we look at the lower frequency world and the higher frequency world, this is you literally having resolved something of a lower frequency in the highest and best of ways. And now that you've completed that healing or that transformation of that, which means you've now transmuted that lower energy that was inside of you, which also then means this is where the karmic reward comes into play. And the most immediate reward is you feel like you cannot deny this when this happens. It's such a cellular thing. Every one of your cells, it literally clicks to another level. That other level is in that higher frequency world. That's what's really happening. And then let's say this happens in the middle of the night, which it often does. It usually happens in your dream state when you're really relaxed. Your conscious mind has gone off to Hawaii for the night, and you're in this incredibly receptive state in a deep, deep, restful sleep. And when you're in this state and you're having this experience I just illuminated or highlighted, you'll know it Because as you're coming through that twilight phase from your nighttime sleep to your waking world, you will recognize, I mean, it'll be all over you. It'll flood your cells. Whoa, something really significant happened to me last night. Yeah, you bet something really significant, something spiritually significant happened to you not only last night, but that significance landed in your physical cell structure. It changed the way your cellular structure was to a new level. That's that higher frequency. That it's not all the higher frequency, it's a part of the higher frequency that comes through your autonomic nervous system, and it literally lands in your cellular structure. And that's what causes the shift. And that's why sometimes some people, not everybody, but some people will literally hear the noise. It's really legible. They'll hear this click, like like a clock clicking to its next hour. It's just an absolute amazing experience, which is available or accessible to each and every one of us. In fact, this is what we're to be having more of on a transformational level at this time.
So as the grateful giraffes, I would be remiss not to ask you about gratitude. What does gratitude mean to you, and how does this practice or frequency or mindset weave in to your process and the way that you guide people?
Great question again. So gratitude, I have a number of thoughts on this. I'll maybe just share a couple of them in light of the little bit of time that we have left here. So gratitude can either come in the form of a thought, where at the end of your day, you ask yourself if there was someone or something that would it be beneficial for me to be grateful towards, who or what might that be? An answer comes to you, and you're on a mental level, you're choosing just to be grateful for that person, or whatever it is that person did for you today, or whatever it is that life did for you today, or your career did for you today, or whatever that might be. Or maybe you learned something of great value today and you're grateful for that. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is where you don't even ask. And all of a sudden it's, I don't know, 2:30 in the afternoon or 9:30 in the morning. And you get flooded, like the rain coming down. There's a soft rain coming, and all of a sudden it floods. It floods. You didn't ask for it, right? It just floods out of nowhere. You know when it's happening because you can see it. If you're outside, you can feel it. You're experiencing it. Well, what I came across a few decades back, where I had my first experience of being flooded with gratitude. I didn't ask for it. I didn't plan on it. It was whatever time of the day. In today's time, sometimes I'm a real avid dreamer. I'm a shamanic dreamer. I work with a lot of people in the dream space as a shaman. So I know the dream world really well. And it can happen here, where I can be in a dream or dream state, or I'm traveling around the universe, and all of a sudden my cells are flooded with just immense gratitude. And not just with wherever I'm traveling, but in some cases, it literally pulls me back into my physical form that's laying on the bed, and where my body just floods with gratitude. Sometimes it'll get teary-eyed. Sometimes I'll go to bed at night and I'll have this experience. And, one of the things I say in my first book, Being Called to Change, at the very end, I talk about smiling and the value of smiling. But when the smile becomes natural, so for me, at some point, it became natural. And one of the best places to smile is inwardly as you're going to bed at night, where, I started to develop this practice many years ago of smiling to the universe or to the divine before I would fall asleep at night. And then it became just natural for me to do it this way. So I don't have to even think about it anymore. So sometimes what will happen now, in light of gratitude and feeling the gratitude, that's another place and where it can come, where once you develop this practice, all of a sudden, you're laying there, your head to the pillow, you're starting to drift off. You recognize you've got this big smile inwardly. You're smiling at the universe. You're smiling at the divine, or you're smiling at maybe your wife or husband, who's laying beside you with your eyes closed. You are drifting into your nighttime sleep space. And while that's all going on, you're just feeling so immensely grateful. Like there's this connection between the smile and gratitude, or gratitude and that natural smile that it just automatically produces. So what I have found is that the more work that I did, as in the inner transformational work, the inner quality transformational work, the more that I was shifting in my own consciousness inwardly, little by little, slowly but surely, to the point of where I turned it all into a lifestyle where I live my life this way and have for quite some time. It was right around that time when I'd start having these spontaneous experiences with gratitude. And I absolutely love it. It's become a way of living for me. It now, with some of my students, it's become a way of living for them as well, where they just too get flooded. We could be doing a seminar, and we're in the seminar for 3 or 4 or 5 days. And one of the days, you'll see the person in the audience. They'll just literally start to get flooded with gratitude. They didn't ask for it. It just happens naturally. That's when you and I are most connected to our, not just our soul, because we could be the embodiment of our soul as well, possibly at that juncture, but to this, and I know we don't have time to really get into this, but with everybody's individual soul, there's also an oversoul. And when you are feeling where every cell in your body is flooded with this kind of gratitude, it's like the blood running through your veins, only this is gratitude running through your cellular structure, through your entire nervous system. What happens is your connection, not just to your soul, but beyond your soul, that too now becomes notable, where you realize there's something even bigger than your soul that's going on here, at least in this particular moment. Because, as I'm sure you know, Max, of all people, gratitude is one of those higher emotions. It's not as high as love, but it's up there among a number of the other higher vibrational emotions that reside in that higher world. They reside in that higher vibrational frequency world. And so it's an amazing thing. And if everybody on the planet was accessing this, even on a week-to-week basis, like you are doing with your grateful giraffe community, which I commend you on your service and on your mission to really bring this out to the world. I love your title that you've given your group, which I mentioned to you when we spoke last. And by the way, there's one other thing I want to mention to you about your title. It came to me too, the giraffe. So, I love giraffes as well as you do. And in fact, one of my dearest friends, she was in Africa, and we were having dinner here just only a few nights ago. And she told me about all these photographs that she took on a safari in Africa. And I started asking her, well, what are the photographs? And so she started naming it off. So I started sharing with her some of my favorite animals. She's like, I got that one, I got that one, I got that one. I said, just out of curiosity, what about a giraffe? Oh, Dale, I've got a couple of great shots of giraffes. I said, well, and so anyhow, we left it go with that. And I said, well, if you're ever in the mood and you want to take any of the pictures that you're called to and blow them up into more of a portrait, then I'd be happy to receive those because I'd love to put them up on my wall. So a couple of weeks pass, which was just only a few days ago. And wouldn't you know it, she brings me the photographs. And Max, you'll love this. I'm thumbing through them. I find some of my favorite animals. And next thing you know, I come across the giraffes that she took on this safari. And there's one in particular that just, it got me a little teary-eyed. I was so moved by it. Anyhow, she's going to blow it up and turn it into a portrait. And I'll be hanging it on my wall here shortly. But to that, here's what I also recognize. Because when I go into a deeper experience with the picture of this particular giraffe, and his amazing long neck, and he wasn't a male, that was really obvious. But he had his head in this tree high up and in the most creative of ways. But then, because it was a full body shot, I saw the 4 legs. Now, I've known this for years, but when you and I had that conversation back a short while ago, and you were sharing with me what you've created here for your community, all of a sudden it dawned on me, 4 legs. What's happening here? Well, you probably know this in numerology. 4 represents foundation. And everybody, in order for them to go the distance in the name of their own transformation or spiritual awakening, it's all dependent on how deep, how strong the foundation is that's underneath them. It's so incredibly powerful. So in my view, to commend you and your partners, you could not have picked a better animal than the giraffe to articulate or be reflected in your community who you are, who your community is, and what your deeper, greater intention is for the community in this way, to provide that kind of foundation that's deep, that's real, that's strong. And you can see it with the giraffe because of all animals, it's got the longest neck. So if the foundation was not strong and well balanced, there's no way that giraffe could have that long neck. It really, that was a nice experience as I was kind of feeling into that photograph from the other night, thinking about you and our conversation most recently had. That was just a beautiful, beautiful experience for me. So
We like to say that the giraffe chose us and not the other way around.
And I relate to that one too. Yes, I totally get it.
The lore of the giraffes has just expanded and accumulated. And here's another one: the 4 legs as the foundation in order for the neck to touch the sky. So thank you for adding to our lore. I think we're about to hit the clock, but I would just love to end with a final question. As we are entering the age of artificial intelligence and technological explosion and expansion, maybe we can close with just a minute or two of your perspective on how humanity will and should interface with this explosion of intelligence, and how it can, unlock our highest potential.
Well, remember, as the technology advances, which can be a real great thing, and it can also be not such a great thing, it all depends on the hands in which the technology lands in. And then to that, it's important, in my view, to really remember that as powerful as the technology might be, you have an even greater power inside of you. Whereas one of the tricks or traps of the ego, not just individually, but collectively on the planet, has been and will continue to be this, at least for the next few years. Next few years, probably being up until maybe 2027, maybe a little bit beyond, because people are going to be tested right now in a way like they've never been tested. Those of us that have truly been transforming and spiritually awakening for years now, we already know, because we've been tested multiple times leading up to this time. That's why we know this so well. And so, but in this, as the technology advances, what we also want to match that with is our own inner technology. And our own inner technology would be consciousness. It's equally important that our consciousness is ahead of the technology. Or otherwise, we possibly find ourselves in a similar situation as in tens of thousands of years ago with the Atlantean civilization, where the technology got out of hand. And remember, we were talking about earlier on in today's show around the significance of choice. And choice, the way in how I make a healthier, wiser, better choice, it all plays back on how much wisdom have I already earned or gained. So even when I was a young kid and I was making those good choices, the other piece I did not know at that point is that I was born into this life with a lot of wisdom, a lot of wisdom. I just didn't know it. And it was that wisdom that I was already born into this life with that I was accessing to make those higher, better choices, therefore getting these amazing results until I couldn't handle it anymore because I couldn't figure it out why this was happening to me and why aren't my other friends and associates not experiencing something similar. Didn't make any sense to me. And so, of course, that was in my 20s. Many years have since passed. Also, since the many years have gone by, not only was I born in this world with a lot of wisdom, I since have gained even more wisdom because of the way I've chosen to live my life, day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. And so now what I see is there's both opportunity on the horizon, and I also see the temptation on the horizon. Remember, the dark and the light are still working. It's not just all light just yet, right? Even though they're of equal power right now, the light and the dark. The dark is not going down without a fight. The dark is coming on with an aggression right now like I've never seen in all the years I've been in this life thus far. I'm grateful, very grateful that the light is where it's at now, because when I was born, the light wasn't that strong on the planet just yet. It was a lot more dark than it was light. Whereas today, we've come to that point where it's about equal, but the battle continues. So in this, the temptation, the opportunity, what will it be? The opportunity is we could utilize the technology as a way to further enhance, to further accelerate and advance the quality of our lives, the quality of how we are with each other, not just individually, but also within our communities, within our cities, within our states and provinces, within our nation, on the globe. And so in this, there's going to be those that are clearly going to go for the temptation because that's what they do. That's how they live their lives individually. They have not changed that octave yet. Then there's going to be those that are going to recognize the opportunity and they're going to choose to utilize this in the best of ways. That'll be on an individual level. The part that I see collectively is that this is not going to be easy. We've got some major bumps coming. We've already seen some of the bumps. The bumps are going to get bumpier because collectively, up until yesterday, we'll say, we're choosing more in line of the temptation collectively. I'm not saying that's how you're choosing or how your partners are choosing or how your community is choosing. I would say that the same thing with our community, with the Dale Halaway network. We're choosing in a healthier way. There's no question about it, just as you are. But right now, we're considered the minority in the planet. That's not a bad thing. That's actually a good thing because we're growing little by little, slowly but surely. No doubt about it, because we do represent the light. But there are others that are, if you will, more in the line of the majority that might even say they're representing the light, but they're really representing the dark. And in all fairness, at least some of those, they might be unconscious towards that, right? But nonetheless, that's what they're representing. So the dark is coming on with its aggression, which means the temptation is getting louder and louder and louder. It's becoming larger and larger and larger. Or another way, I use this word with another group here not long ago, it's becoming sexier. People love it. You can really seduce people when things show up in a sexy way. It's just so easy to do it, right? The opportunity, however, the opportunity shows up differently. An opportunity would be something that's now real. An opportunity is something that we're going to choose to take this amazing technology and we're going to utilize it in the best way possible, in a way where we remain conscious, where we remain responsible, recognizing that if we choose to misuse this technology, there's probably going to be a karmic implication for that. If, on the other hand, we use this technology in a healthy way, in a higher octave way, then what that means is we can touch more people in the best of ways, which is obviously part of our soul calling. But to that, because the majority is not quite here yet, remember the splitting. It's the splitting of our world, not the earth, but the splitting of our world as we have known it. So there's going to be those who are going to stay committed to the way they're utilizing technology via their social media sites and whatever. Then there are going to be those of us that are choosing to use it in a higher way, in a more constructive way. And so as these next couple of years go by, we're going to see more get sucked into the temptation, which then is going to cause even more bumps. We're going to see more over time choose to recognize this responsibly and consciously as the opportunity where we can utilize it. Or maybe in some cases, maybe there's some technology that intuitively we get a real bad feeling on, right? So we're getting better at trusting our own intuition, our own souls, our own guides, our own angels. Just because it's technology and just because it's advanced does not mean to say it's always what it's cracked up to be. There might be a whole nother agenda behind that as well. So, and what I'm noticing now here on the ground, that is more and more people, they're like, I don't know about this. I don't get a good feeling on this. Kind of like your politician, right? Politician comes on, has all the right words. I don't know about him. I'm getting a bad feeling. Or, a politician comes on and there's something about her I really like. I can't explain it, but there's something about her that's really solid, right? So that's also part of this experience too. So just to know that, this is both an exciting time that we're in, and we're the new way of being on the planet, the new world that we're ultimately rising up to hasn't fully been embodied yet. We're in process now, clearly, of that happening. So this opportunity temptation dynamic, this is going to go on until the earth ultimately completes her transition, as in becoming that new world for those of us that take the lift with her, for those of us that take the ride with her, which means we're now changing our lives as well for the better from the inside out on a more regular basis. And then to that, we're getting better and better at the choices that we're making. And especially when it comes to your question here around the technology that's coming out, and how more specifically will we choose to use that technology? What's the real intention behind that technology? Are we aware of what that technology possibly is a part of? Because that's the other piece, right? If I'm really representing the light well, if I'm a true agent of the light, then I also need to explore this as well. That, okay, amazing technology. It's kind of like a teacher. Looks like an amazing teacher, but where's the teacher coming from? Where's the teacher coming from when he or she's teaching? An amazing leader, but where's the leader actually coming from? So another way to explore, another area to examine, and then go with your own intuition, go with your own gut, run it up and down your own inner flagpole. Does this really feel right to you? Does this really resonate with you? And if it does, and it checks all the boxes, then whatever that technology is, go ahead and use it, utilize it in the highest, best, brightest of ways. If on the other hand, the technology maybe isn't in complete resonance with you yet, maybe there's something else that's more in resonance with you, then I'd recommend you look for that, ask for that, intend to find that, or intend for that to find you, and then begin to embrace that as part of your technology that you're going to be utilizing to reach more people in terms of whatever your service might be.
Amazing. Well, we see gratitude as an ancient technology. We see the giraffe as the connector between that technology and humanity. And we hope to bring the lights to the majority through this grateful symbol. So, Dale, it's been an honor and a privilege to have you on today's chat. Extremely enlightening. Super grateful for your time. And I think I speak on behalf of the entire community that we really appreciate you, and we feel more empowered to have the 2024 of our dreams. So thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who's stayed on this call for almost 2 hours. Appreciate your time as well. And we'll post this recording in just a few hours. So thanks again.
Oh, you are so welcome. From my heart to yours, my love and aloha. Have a wonderful, incredible, and hopefully really prosperous new 2020 or 2024 year.
Thank you, Dale. Bye,
You're
everyone.
welcome.
Have a wonderful Wednesday.